holy shit, I was vomiting a lot. Like, a lot. Welcome into the podcast. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, you might have noticed something a little different. Some quick housekeeping items. This podcast, I am rebranding this from the podcast name of Saturday is Datterday to the new podcast name, which is Story Lesson Advice. And the reason I'm doing that is because Saturday is Datterday, what the podcast used to be called, is now going to be called Saturday is Datterday Media. And this is going to be a whole media group that I am going to have multiple podcasts under, blogs, videos on the YouTube channel, and even books all in due time. So what I'm doing right now is just kind of building this out. We have a website that is up. It is sidmedia.net. Saturday is DatterDayMedia.net. And there you can access all of the podcasts. We're going to have up to 4. And we're going to have blogs. I already have 1 or 2 blogs up there already. You can access our YouTube channel, which is at Saturday is Datterday Media. And I have about probably 20 videos on there so far. They are clips and full episodes of the podcast. That was Saturday is Datterday. That is now Story Lesson Advice, as well as I'm going to be doing some book reviews on books that I find interesting, some culinary videos leaning into my former culinary life, as well as some product reviews and other sorts of things as well. And down the road, hopefully be looking at some books in the form of cookbooks and maybe some other forms of storytelling as well. So wanted to get that out of the way. I'm super excited. It's going to be something I'm building out much bigger than just the podcast that I started a couple of years ago. So I am excited. Now, back to the story at hand. I said, holy shit, I was vomiting and a lot. And here's the story about that. About 2 years ago, my daughter was at school and we got a call saying, hey, your daughter's had some tummy trouble and she's thrown up and we need to get her picked up and get back home. So middle of the day, just so happens to be, I run out to grab her, and on the way I'm making a doctor's appointment and we go see the doctor. And as we're there, the doctor's checking her out and saying, yep, you definitely have the flu and this and that, and here's what we need to do in medicine. And as the doctor is going through, it's like a scene in one of those movies where like the person kind of tunes out and everything just sort of becomes distorted and it's blurred. That's what was happening to me. And I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? Like, my daughter's the one who's sick. So I kind of shake it off. We leave the doctor's room. We go out in the waiting room. We're waiting for a prescription or I don't know, something like that. And as we're sitting there waiting, I said to my daughter, you got to come to the bathroom with me. And I went in there, I ran in, I leaned over the sink, not the toilet for whatever reason, but the sink because I thought I was going to vomit. And I did not. I held it off. I played aggressive defense on it, like Duke basketball in the 90s where they're slapping the floor defense, like that kind of aggressive defense. Did not throw up. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but we both need to go home and just whatever. So we went home, waiting on the prescription to be fulfilled. And we're sitting at home. And my daughter and I are laying in my bed and she starts vomiting again. I'm like, oh my goodness. So we had a bowl, set up for her or whatever. So we took care of her. Everything's good to go. I'm sitting there and about 10 minutes later, I had a bowl next to me because like I said, I wasn't apparently feeling well either. And I just sit up in bed and just start vomiting profusely into this popcorn bucket, which is reserved for me. If anybody knows me, I love popcorn. It's reserved for popcorn. So now I'm looking at this thing that I am just destroying with my jet puking and just vomiting profusely. And my daughter's sitting right next to me on the bed, and she was kind of freaked out, I think. But my wife comes running in to check, and as she comes in, I shouldn't say running, she comes walking in very calmly, and she starts laughing, and I'm sitting there throwing up, in the middle of throwing up. I'm thinking, what are you doing laughing at me? Like, I'm just vomiting. And then my daughter starts singing, Daddy's a ding dong, Daddy's a ding dong. And I don't know where that came from. So they're both laughing. I'm puking. And long story short, my wife was just about ready to leave for a work trip for like 3 days. So my daughter's sick. I'm sick. My wife is gone because why not? So we spend the next 3 days, my daughter and I, laying in bed, taking turns puking, eating popsicles and pretzels and drinking water and Gatorade and watching, I think, like 150 episodes of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. So that was quite the 3 day mini vacation that I didn't ask for. But I asked my wife, why, when you walked in, were you smiling and kind of laughing? And then when our daughter started singing and making fun of me because as I was throwing up, why were you laughing and singing with her? And she said, because your daughter was watching. And it was very important that my response was measured enough to not freak out our daughter so that she wouldn't have an overreaction to maybe my wife's overreaction. And now we've turned in when you're getting sick, not that it's not serious, but now we've made it maybe a bigger thing. So that was not what I wanted to hear at the time. But looking back, my wife was correct, as she often is. And I thought that was an interesting story. So on the subject of kids, somebody said this quote, or I read this somewhere, so it's not my quote, but I'll take it. I'll be that lazy to take the quote. Somebody said that kids equal long days and short years. And I think that is a perfect summation, because our daughter's 5 now. But when she was younger, the first couple of years, so much of the time did I feel like, and we just have one kid, like, everybody that has 2 or more kids laughs at parents that have only one kid. Like, you're not even real parents. But that my wife and I felt like so much of the time we were just trying to get to the next mile marker, whether it was nap time or the second nap or bedtime or whatever. And not that we weren't enjoying being in the moment, but so much of it felt like, man, we're just trying to get to the next thing where we can take a break, the next time where we can have just a little relief or a little peace and quiet or get caught up on whatever we needed to. And then poof, the day's gone, and then it starts all over again. And it just feels like this incredibly long slog, and not necessarily in a bad way. It's just like, man, you are in it from the second you wake up until they go to bed. And then all of a sudden you blink your eyes and 2 years has passed, and you see a photo that pops up on your phone as a memory, and you're like, we don't even have that Halloween costume anymore because she grew out of it 2 years ago. So that is hard to deal with, but it's to me, it's something to think about, that as you go through these mile markers, birthdays, holidays, whatever, not that those are, not only that those are the most important times you're going to have as a parent when they're young, sort of that core window, but at each of those moments, and even day-to-day stuff, your kids are watching what you do. And you are modeling behavior for them, whether you want to admit it or not. And that is something that my wife and I have tried really hard to be aware of. And I think that is an important lesson as we are talking about the Story Lesson Advice podcast. That is an important lesson to learn, is the idea that your kids are always watching. And they are always looking at mom and dad. And even if you don't think that they are always watching what you do, how you do it, how you speak, the way you speak, what you say. And I think one thing that's really important as parents to see, to recognize in that, is they're going to watch you, how you deal with conflict with each other and with other people. And, there's an analogy or a trope that's been played out in TV or movies or whatever about, someone, 2 people being on a date, and the guy is a total jerk to the server. And that sort of informs the girl, like, okay, this guy's not for me. And she gets up and leaves or whatever. But so the same thing about when you have that opportunity to model the behavior in front of your children, or to your children, how you're doing that, they are watching, and you are helping shape how they are going to react to similar situations. When you are told no, when you are arguing with your spouse, when you have a difference of opinion, when something goes wrong, when you drop something, I tend to get pretty upset at silly, stupid things that you probably shouldn't get upset about. But so much of my life I've tried to force into sort of efficiency and optimization, and everything is humming along at the perfect pace and the perfect speed. And then you have kids, and it's like, The one thing that you don't need them to do is to knock over the bowl of cereal that they have on the couch or whatever. The one thing you don't need them to do is to knock the drink off the ledge. And inevitably, that one thing that you don't want them to do, that's the thing that happens. And it's incredibly frustrating. But how we deal with that frustration, not only inwardly, but how we express that outwardly, they are always watching no matter what we do. And I also think, as I mentioned before, with the conflict aspect, it's healthy for your children to see mom and dad argue. And it's healthy for them to see that as long as you are having that conflict in a healthy and constructive manner, because it's important to see the beginning, middle, and end, the resolution of how that happens. So as they're sitting there watching and you're in the kitchen and it goes from, sort of some sarcastic comments to maybe a little more aggressive to kind of an all-out fight. Well, how you're doing that? How are you talking to each other? Are you still talking respectfully to each other? Are you still communicating the way that two adults who love each other should be communicating? And that's what your children are going to see. So they're going to be able to see, hey, conflict is okay because you can move through the conflict, you can resolve it, and you can see that at the end you can still love each other. As it translates for them, you can still be friends with the person that took your toy at school. So I think that is a major, major lesson. But on the subject, sometimes it's frustrating with kids. I mean, I hate kids. Like, I don't hate my kid. I love my kid, and I love my friends' kids, or I have to pretend that I do. Joking. But seriously, like, kids are a pain in the ass. They suck. Like, they just are a total drain suck on everything of your life sometimes. And it's really difficult when you're struggling with work or with home or whatever, and then you have to deal with kids, and then you have to deal with other people's kids who maybe are not your friends' kids or kids you don't know, and it just can become, difficult. And you might disagree with me, but I guarantee. So answer me this. Tell me the last time you went to a public park and you saw 50 kids running around and your instant reaction was, yes, exactly what I was hoping for on a quiet Saturday morning, and not being able to sit here and sip my coffee in peace. I'm half joking with this, but in all seriousness, your kids are watching how you are behaving, what you're doing, and we are not only helping shape their behavior, but the way that we talk to them and talk to ourselves and each other, we are helping shape their inner voice, the way that they're going to talk to themselves in their head. And as I've mentioned before on previous episodes, I have not always done a great job about talking well to myself, treating myself with enough respect. And our kids can pick up on that. So they are always watching. That is the lesson. All right, now it's time for today's sponsor, I Wish I Had. And I just so happen to have one tin left. Today's sponsor, I Wish I Had, is Bourbon Barrel Foods. This is a company that makes spices, seasonings, rubs, sauces, and a whole bunch more, all with that Kentucky hug built in. They are a brand that I've been using for years. I've given them away as gifts to a lot of customers, to friends. I've ordered myself gifts for a lot of times, but they are based in Kentucky. They make an entire line of all these products. Bourbonbarrelfoods.com is their website. If you are grilling, smoking, you want to make some fun dishes inside as the weather's getting cold and maybe you can't get outside for grilling and you want to add a really unique flavor or punch to what you're doing, even pastas, all sorts of dishes. Bourbon Barrel Foods, 100% totally worth it. The one that I have left here is a chili and coffee rub, and that is great. Used to live in Texas, so put that on a brisket, state bird of Texas, and man, that is just great, right as rain. They have a bunch of other seasonings. Some are spicy, some offer all different types of flavor profiles, and they all have, like I said, that hint of bourbon built in. Some more prominent than others, but really great product. Bourbonbarrelfoods.com. Bourbon Barrel Foods, today's sponsor, I Wish I Had. So we talked about the crazy story of both my daughter and I taking turns jet puking for 3 days and laying in bed. We talked about the lesson to learn from that, which is your kids are always watching. So how you handle yourself, how you talk to each other, to yourself, how you treat yourself, how you treat each other, our kids are always watching. And kind of the overarching advice that I would give myself on all of this, and maybe it applies to some other people, is the concept of patience with your kids. And I know that might sound, fluff on the surface, but the reason I'm saying that is I think sometimes we forget that our kids are kids. And we've been doing things, eating, drinking, grabbing stuff, walking for 30, 40, 50 years. And they are just in their beginning stages of learning how to do that. And I know that that seems obvious, but sometimes my frustration is, my daughters, I mentioned, knock something over or whatever. Now, there's no harm in that. Who cares? Whatever. But I'm like, man, of course we got knocked over a bowl of cereal, or we knocked over whatever, and there's ketchup all over the floor. And it's one thing if my daughter was messing around and purposely doing that, but she doesn't do that. So if she does that, it's because she doesn't have spatial awareness of what's going on. She doesn't realize how close she is to something, knocking something over, whatever. And sometimes I forget that, yeah, she's 5. Like, she's got minimal experience at doing this. And I've got 42 years of experience doing this, and plenty of times where I knock things over and drop stuff and broke stuff even as an adult. But you think about, for us, how efficient and how quickly we can be as adults, from getting ready and getting our clothes on and our shoes on and loading up the car and getting out the door and all that. And all those things that is just muscle memory for us because we do it every day and we're so fast at it. Our kids, even though they're learning and they're getting much better at that, that's a lot for a small person and a young person to process and a young brain to process. And I think it's important for us that we are patient with our kids, and patient because of the understanding of those things, that they're just kids. And think about how many times we forget to do things and we make mistakes. We forget to make an appointment to, go see the dentist, or we, forget something at the grocery store, or we forgot to deposit that check or whatever. And like, we're adults, so we're forgetting those things, and we need to show ourselves grace. We need to show each other grace, and we need to show our children grace, with the understanding that they are just starting to figure all this stuff out. And even though they're walking and they can put their shoes on and they can brush their teeth and they can climb up the slides instead of going down, that doesn't mean that they're capable yet of all the stuff that we think that they should be able to do, and as quickly as they should be able to do it. So that is the lesson that I would give. And correlating with that, the second piece of advice or quote that I have stolen from some other intellectual property today, I think it was Michael Keaton that said this, that said, spend as much time as you can with your kids because you'll never regret it. And that's true. And I think earlier when I was saying about sometimes it's such a slog just to get through the day with kids, you just feel like time is literally moving backwards when you're spending time with them, instead of like, man, can we just get to dinner time, or can we just get to bedtime or whatever? But looking back, I always have good memories of enjoying time with my daughter. And one day that's going to be gone, and pretty soon. And she's 5 now, and we're coming up on Halloween, and we've only got a couple of these left where she's going to want to dress up, and then it's not going to be cool anymore. And you think about that and like, man, she's already 5 and we've only got a couple more of these. And before it's kind of a whatever holiday, Halloween is, I don't even care anymore as an adult. You still have holidays with Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, but you've only got a couple of these things. So as we think about spending as much time as possible with our kids now, because we won't regret it. And one day that time's going to be gone, and then the house is going to be awfully quiet. So that is my advice on that. So we have our story of jet puking. We have the lesson of your kids are always watching. And the advice is be patient with your kids and show them that patience by spending as much time as you can with them and make the best of it, because before we know it, gone. All right, for today's Just the Tip, it's almost kind of more of a visual segment. So I'm going to throw something on Instagram, or make a little video on the YouTube page. The Instagram is at Saturday is Dadderday Media, and so is the YouTube page at Saturday is Dadderday Media. So check those out sometime this week. If you are enjoying what we're talking about here, what I'm talking about, then consider following the podcast and consider following the Instagram account. I try to throw stuff up there every day or so. I do have a regular job, so try to do this just intermittently when I can, at night, on weekends, that kind of thing. But check that out. Check out the YouTube page. We're going to have a lot more videos. Today's Just the Tip is I'm going to talk about how to more properly season a steak. And there's a million videos out there, and I just want to touch on a couple of things. So I used to cook professionally, and one of the positions I was a lead broiler cook for over a year at one of the places that I worked at, which means I worked on this giant slide broiler that you pull out the shelf that's basically a grill, and you can throw, 50, 75 steaks on it. You push it back in, and the heat is from up above, and it's crazy hot. It would get to be like 1,100 degrees. And I mean, I would lose 4 or 5 pounds every night cooking on that thing just from sweating it off because it was so hot. But one of the things that I learned from that is when you're seasoning a steak, kosher salt is what I prefer. Some people use sea salt, but the reason I like kosher salt is it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit flakier, it's a little bit easier to kind of pick up and pinch in your finger and kind of see the spread that you're getting when you're sprinkling the salt on there. So I prefer to use kosher salt. And then what I like to do is I do not like to use pepper. And I know that that's contradictory for a lot, but the reason why is because salt is a seasoning and pepper is a spice, which means pepper can burn if you're using a cast iron pan or if your grill is super hot or whatever. So I think all you need is really good salt. So the way that I would suggest seasoning the steak is, first of all, you need to be getting a ribeye or a New York strip, 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick. That's where you want to be. I don't like fillets, and you've probably heard this before because there's not a lot of fat inside intertwined in the muscle. So what ends up happening, you get a very tender steak, but you don't have nearly as much flavor as you could, and it's not nearly as forgiving because there's not a lot of extra fat in there that kind of melts and turns into that umami texture and kind of makes it feel a little extra buttery. So I like ribeye, I like New York strip. I prefer bone off. It's going to save you some money, and I just prefer to not have the bone on there. I think it's just a cleaner cook, and you get a more even cook all the way around. So that's the first two parts. Salt, and then get yourself a 2 or 2.5 inch thick New York strip or ribeye. I know that seems pretty thick. That's what you want. And the second part is, if you're going to be sharing it with someone and you have one of those steaks and they're pretty thick, before you start cooking, cut it in half. Now you have 2 separate steaks from raw. You can cook them at 2 different temperatures. You can season them different, however you want. That's what I recommend. And the second step, let it come up to room temperature for about 30, 45 minutes. Let it sit out there. You don't have to do this. There's a lot of steakhouses that just keep their steaks in the refrigerator. They open up the door and they season their steak and throw it right on the grill. So, and those are great steaks. So you don't have to do this, but if you have the time at home, that's what I would suggest. So pull it out, let it sit for 30, 45 minutes. And then I like to use oil to coat the steak to moisten it so you have something for the salt to stick to. Some people will say grapeseed or avocado oil. I just use olive oil. The one potential disadvantage with that is olive oil has a lower smoke point, which means it can burn faster, but I'm not drenching it in this. I'm just sort of lightly basting it or kind of rubbing it in my hands with olive oil just to coat it lightly. So usually it's never a problem for me. And then what I do is I hit it with a lot of kosher salt, more than you would think. And again, I don't use pepper because I just prefer salt on the steak, but you can, everybody and their mother uses salt and pepper and they don't deal with burns and all that. An important distinction, salt is a seasoning, pepper is a spice, and spices can burn under high heat. So what I prefer to do is just use salt, kosher salt, and you're almost going to want to over salt it because when you throw it on a grill, even if you follow the tried and true method of not poking and prodding it and flipping it every 5 seconds, you're still going to lose a lot of that salt that's just going to fall off from being on the grill. So that olive oil is going to kind of act like a glue that's going to hold that salt. And then over salt the hell out of your steak within reason, but really give it a good dose of salt on both sides, the front side, the back side, and all the edges as well. And then let that rest a couple of minutes and then toss it on the grill. What I prefer to do is have a hot grill, so medium high heat. Some people like to just crank up the grill as much as possible and they think that's cool or you're being a badass. But grilling food, whatever it is, it's about controlling the heat, and really cooking anything for that matter. It's about controlling the heat. So steak can handle high heat, something like a medium high or high. That doesn't mean that you can just walk away and forget about it. So I like to go medium high heat on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 7, 7.5, 8. And then I throw it down. I like my steaks rare to medium rare. Rare is a temperature, so there is a temperature range for that. So raw is not a temperature, rare is a temperature. So I like between rare and medium rare, especially if you're dealing with a ribeye or a New York strip. Anything more than that, and you might as well throw it in the garbage, in my opinion. So that's what I like to do. Pull it off, let it rest 10 to 12 minutes. I know that may seem weird because your steak's going to get cold. It might seem like it's cooling off a little bit, but what you can do is before you cut it, just flash it real fast back on the grill for 5 or 10 seconds just to get it warm again on the outside. But you're going to want to let it rest so the juices kind of come back together. Everything gets all frazzled when it cooks, and you want it to come back together and sit back inside itself. And then when you cut it, the juices stay within the meat. They don't run all over your cutting board, all over your plate. And you can add fresh herbs. You can hit it with butter at the end. You can do any of that kind of stuff. The last thing that I do, if you do want to add your pepper, is after you slice it, if you're going to slice it kind of, like you see on Instagram or whatever, then hit it with a little bit more salt and then crack some fresh black pepper on top of it, and Bob's your uncle. So there you go. So that is today's extended Just the Tip. Hey-o.
Okay, today's Whisper In is going to keep with the culinary theme. This is a book. If you are watching on YouTube, our YouTube channel, you can see it. If you're not watching and you're listening, because most of the time podcast is an audio medium, if you're listening, the name of the book is called Culinary Artistry. And it is one of the amazing books, the most amazing books that I have ever read regarding food. The authors are Andrew Dorenberg and Karen Page. And the reason that I love this book so much is because they break out the culinary aspects of the book, not only by showing different famous chefs and different menus that they've put together using ingredients, but they break out all the different ingredients, whether it's spices or foods or vegetables or proteins, and then underneath that, they show you everything that matches with that. For example, I just flipped opening the book, and it has a page that says Seasoning Matches Made in Heaven, and it shows the anchovy. And under the anchovy, it says this goes best with Caesar salad, pizza, potatoes, puttanesca, tapenade. Now that's not the only things, but that gives you an idea if you're looking to put together a recipe or flavor profiles. It's really interesting. Another example, they have sea bass listed. They tell you what time of year you want to serve it in, winter time or springtime. And then they list about 30 ingredients that go well with sea bass. So stuff like cumin, garlic, ginger, shallots, rosemary. And they also tell you the best ways you can prepare the sea bass. You can bake it, braise it, grill it, poach it, roast it, saute it. And it gives you some references for recipes. It's a very simple book to digest. It is fantastic. And every time I get myself in a rut and I can't figure out what to cook, this book does the trick because it gives me a jumping off point for various different flavor profiles with different types of food. Or if I get stuck, if I have maybe a nice piece of venison and I'm kind of scratching my head on what to cook it with, I can open this up and it will tell me everything I should cook with it, the seasonings I should use, different vegetables that go well, different greens that go well with it. It's an outstanding book. It is called Culinary Artistry. It is by Andrew Dorenberg and Karen Page. They are James Beard Award-winning authors. And that is today's Whisper In.
All right, as we wrap up our first rebranded episode of Story Lesson Advice, what did we talk about? Well, the first thing we talked about, the story, was me jet puking and my daughter jet puking, and that being a 3-day unplanned vacation that we took. And what was so important about that, the lesson that was tied into that, was that your children are always watching what you do, how you act, how you respond, how you behave, how you talk to each other, how you talk to yourself, all of those things. You are modeling for them the kind of behavior, And not only that, you are helping shape their inner voice, the way that they talk to themselves over time. So it is critical that we do that. The advice that I would give is to have patience with your kids, and not just surface level comment of, hey, be patient with your kids, but be patient with your kids because of the fact that they are paying attention to everything that you're doing, and we are helping shape their behavior and their inner voice. And a great way to be patient with your kids is spend as much time as you can with them and let them see that patience on display. Let them see you work through frustrations and conflicts and overcome obstacles, and let them see you have to deal with a return at Home Depot that isn't going well, or someone being a jerk to someone that you're standing in front of, or you having to send back something at a restaurant, whatever. Let them see the right way to handle those things. For the sponsor I wish I had, it was Bourbon Barrel Foods, their website, bourbonbarrelfoods.com. Seasonings, spices, sauces, a whole lot more, all with a hint of bourbon. It's a product I've been using for years. Highly recommend you to check them out. The tip segment was all about learning how to properly season a steak. I went through a pretty exhaustive thing, and I'll throw something up on Instagram or YouTube to show you that as well. And the Whisper In was about a book called Culinary Artistry. And it is a book that I have used for years, as far back as culinary school, so 10 years now. About 10 years. And it has helped me put together menu items. It has helped me write menus and write recipes, because it's a great resource that's sort of a cross-reference resource where if you look for venison in there, it'll tell you all the different seasonings, spices, vegetables, sauces that go well with venison. And you can kind of get an idea of a kind of a dish that you could put together by utilizing all of that information. And then if you flip later in the book, it might have something like sweet potatoes as a vegetable. And then under sweet potatoes, it lists all the different seasonings and spices and foods that go well with sweet potatoes, including venison. So it's really interesting how it kind of works back and forth, but it's so helpful, such a helpful book. It's written by 2 James Beard award-winning authors on cookbooks, and it is hands down anybody that wants to cook, that enjoys cooking at home, that needs kind of just a jumping off point. It's so useful. So I highly recommend that. Culinary Artistry is today's Whispering. Thank you so much for listening to this first rebranded podcast of Story Lesson Advice, part of the Saturday is Dadderday Media Network. Please check out our website, sidmedia.net. Podcasts, videos, blogs, and eventually books, all in due time. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.